Before we get started, I'm super, super happy to be here in person with you all. I'm trying to think the last time I gave an in-person talk, clearly November, but before that, it's been a long time. So thank you all for coming in person. Please enjoy your meals while we talk. Raise your hand if you were at my talk in November. I'm just curious. So maybe about half of the folks in the room. Okay, so we all know what that was about. Wink, wink, right? And so I'm in this period of reflection, and it's a beautiful time to reflect. You know, I've been at Cornell now, this is my 6th year, and I'm just like, did I even do the thing I said I was going to do? Was it worth it all? You know, it's just this time to think about what's next. And so the other thing is, after that talk, a lot of people came up to me and they were like, well, how do you do this? How do you do this? First and foremost, I'm tired, okay? And that's with no R, like tired, like I am tired. But I wanted to spend today actually talking about like, how do we actually do this type of work? Especially because increasingly there are more and more scholars on campus who are really vested in doing community engaged work in really meaningful ways. So to get started, I want to set the scene, and I'm going to get a little personal in this talk. I'm going to be a little non-traditional. I appreciate folks like Tony and Juan and Sarah, all the folks in BCTR who create this space for us to have like non-traditional research talks. And then again, at the end, I'll save time so we can have real conversations about what's going on. So first, I'm gonna start with my mama. We are cut from the same cloth. Oftentimes we are expected to act like we do this research and we have to remove ourselves from it. But for most of us, our research is because of who we are. It drives a lot of what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. So I get a lot of my characteristics and my traits from my mother. And so I wanted to honor her during Women's History Month on my first slide. But there's a story behind this picture, of course. So some people are always like, you're really fearless. It's not that I'm not fearless. It's not that I'm fearless. It's just that I'm going to do it anyways, right? I'm really scared, but I'm going to do it anyways. Where did I get that from? This is the APHA conference. Can't remember the year, maybe like 2018, 2019, San Diego. My mother now has my conference schedule because she likes to travel for free. And so she looks particularly for the places near beaches and such. So this is San Diego. I'm in a biostats meeting, and it's one of those like all day. It's about 10 o'clock. I get a text message saying, hey, I'm gonna run to Tijuana real quick. I'll be back by dinner. My mother speaks no Spanish, okay? So somehow I know I can't, it's beyond. By the time she's texting me, she's already in the line, right? She didn't text me when she was on the way. So I knew I couldn't do anything about it. So I'm focusing on the biostats training or whatever. And she's like, I will pick you up afterwards. This is the vehicle in which she picked me up. And I was like, well, what do you want me to do? And she was like, well, hop on. And so this is my mother. So of course I hopped on. But again, I just wanted to set the scene for when people are like, why are you the way you are? This woman, Veronica, okay? There were some other moments in my life that have just like really defined who I am as a person and as a scholar. And a lot of that happened with my upbringing in Durham, North Carolina. So North Carolina people, anybody North Carolina? All right, stand up, twist around your head like a helicopter. Only North Carolina people probably know that song. Anyways, but it was just a really important time in my life. So I moved there in middle school, and I pretty much stayed until leaving for my PhD. So for you to understand a little bit about who I am, and my students say I shouldn't say swag anymore, but I say it anyways. But like my little swag, I just wanted to play this little video so you understand what Durham is about.
Yeah, it's home. They tell tales of a city built on tobacco, a bull so hard to lasso. Decades of smoke, just a rise from the ash though. That's what we do. Do Durham means doing you. From Eagles on Lawson Street to the Devils in Duke Blue. We're fluent and inclusive, and we speak progressive great. Master and manufacture, PhD and innovate. Where ideas liberate and Broadway comes to staging on any given day. Hit the bull when a steak. It's the home of James Shepard, Spalding, John Merrick. Black Wall Street, the legacy we inherit. From Hayti to Walltown, research the underground. Eno to Jordan, all people our town. We even pioneer life-saving medication over a craft beer, and the best food you tasted is Durham. The H is silent, the A too. Speak with a southern drawl, say y'all and bruh too. It's the Bull City, please allow me to welcome you. There'll be much time for talk, but in Durham we just do. The Bull City, please allow me to welcome you. There'll be more time for talk, but in Durham we just do.
All right, so that's actually a classmate of mine from high school, and it says a lot about our character though. We are people of doers. Durham has this really rich history, especially with its Black residents. Of course, there's tension with the relationship with Duke University there. It's like the city of medicine, but who's getting that medicine? It's the time when disparities started to actually become really clear. When I went to schools where I had classmates driving Range Rovers, and also like other situations where it was like, did you hear so-and-so got shot last weekend? And it was a classmate. So I got both of those all in one setting. And I'm really grateful for that experience because again, it's really shaped how I do what I do, with a little like Durham swag. Sometimes you'll see me with my bull, I won't do that much today. So anyways, that's kind of how I got here. It's like I grew up in Durham. I said, I want to be the change, do something great. So I went through my academic journey. I went to Chapel Hill. Tony also went to Chapel Hill. Any other Chapel Hill? Yep, Adam. All right. We got some Chapel Hill people here. Went to Chapel Hill for undergrad, Meredith College for my master's, University of Minnesota for my PhD, Berkeley postdoc, and then ended up here. Between there, I had lots of really interesting jobs. I worked at USDA for about 9 months with the group that collects the diet data for NHANES. That was really fascinating. So when people say like 25% of Americans eat X, Y, and Z, that's the group of people that usually collect that data. So I learned a lot. So I came actually like really excited to Cornell. I was like, man, here it is. Like I've been in school for like 12 years. I'm finally going to get a little paycheck. That's a separate story about that first paycheck because I messed up and bought furniture, but I shouldn't have. But anyways, I caught myself like basketball players when they first buy a bunch of stuff and it's that first check. I did that, but it's okay. And so I was really excited. But then these stats became really apparent. Like I felt it. And it's not that I didn't know it. Clearly, I've been trained in the academy, but it felt different as a faculty member. 34%. So here are some Cornell stats: 34% female, 8% Black. So think about that in the context of the work that I do and where I'm from Durham. There's a lot of Black people in Durham, Black Wall Street, Hayti Center, like the history is so rich. And then to come here in Ithaca and not feeling othered, right? And so I had to figure out, how am I going to navigate this space and do this work that's really meaningful to me? Let's also recognize and let's have some real talk about what does it mean to do community engaged work at a research one institution and at an Ivy League. So as a land grant, it's built in our mission, right? We got some extension people here. Yeah, I love you all. Like I've been working with extension for the past 15 years, starting in North Carolina, again at Berkeley and Minnesota. I love extension, but what we don't talk about enough is that as faculty, the tension between doing outreach work and oftentimes we're being told we're not real scientists, right? And so we're like, hey, let's collaborate, but the things that we're being measured on, right, in practice, it's really hard. And so there's conversations that aren't being had publicly about, well, how do we do this work and not lose our jobs? And then add on that, if you are first gen or you help support your family, you see where the tensions lie, but don't forget whose child I am. So I was going to do it anyways. And if I got fired, I just got fired behind it. And so what does it actually take to do this work then? And how did I actually do this for the past 6 years? So let's talk about that. And to do that, we can use ACE as a case study. So I've talked about ACE in several settings. I'm not going to go into a lot of the findings. Really, what I want to talk about is the story, the backstory behind how ACE came about. So I'm going to give the high level science. Forget reading all this. I will sum this up. So I have three big objectives. One is I need to call out these disparities, especially when it comes to adolescents. There's a lot of research on adults, and adults are disproportionately impacted by X, Y, and Z, but you'll be surprised that there's not that many people working with adolescents, nutrition and health and wellness. And that wellness part is really important to me. So first, what's really frustrating to me is oftentimes I have to prove things that I know, that we know. When we walk outside and go in neighborhoods and people are like, well, we don't know if that problem exists. You know, like, have you not been outside? Have you not gone anywhere? So this, nonetheless, I have to do this because my mission is bigger than my ego. I say that all the time. My mission is bigger than my ego. This isn't about me. While I do this because I have to do it. A1 is that. So I have to point out problems that we already know have existed for 400 years in this country. Okay. The next thing that I spend a lot of my time doing is actually creating solutions to these problems. So it's one thing to study a problem and a completely separate thing to actually try to solve said problem. And this is where academics really divide, right? This is where some of the tension is. People are like, oh, we're going to report on Black and white differences, and I'm an equity researcher. No, not really, right? You might study that. You might have had some data about it, but are you actually digging deep? Do you actually understand the problem? Do you actually understand the people? Are you on the ground? Are you listening? So this is that second aim of mine. Like, how do we actually start thinking about solutions? And then the third aim is, once we come up with some good ideas, how do we institutionalize it? We all are in the grant world, right? You get a grant for 1 year, 3 years, if you're lucky 5, right? Then you're reapplying. What is the plan after the grant runs out? And so for me, what I didn't want to do was just keep coming in and out. Thank you for letting me get this data. And then like the study and the program we spent all this time creating just disappears. So I always go in with a plan for how to sustain. Now, whether said plan will work or not, we're to be determined, right? But my intentions are, we got a plan A, B, and C for how this can exist beyond the grant. So thinking about some of the specific problems I'm looking at, mostly I'm actually a poverty researcher, but guess what, y'all? Say what? Okay. Black people and other minoritized people are disproportionately poor. I wonder why. Structural racism, right? So because of that, we need to acknowledge, like, that's a lot of what's driving my work, right? Is that there are these poor health outcomes experienced by those from low SES homes, right? And again, that's also the intersectionality between income, race, ethnicity, right? But then you saw the title of my talk. It was engaging in nutrition research. And I also said the word lessons. So one of the lessons when we talk about poverty is we can't keep working in silos. So yes, I'm a nutrition scientist by training. When I'm at a table, I'm often representing nutrition, but I would be really not an okay scholar if I didn't also acknowledge employment insecurity or housing insecurity or educational issues. In many ways, nutrition is a privilege to think about. People think about hunger, but to think about nutrition, that's actually quite privileged, right? People can have the brain space to think about nutrition when their rent is paid, they're in a safe environment, they have employment, they can send their kids to school and be safe and not have to worry about the school being shot up, right? So what does that mean? I've been doing all this training in nutrition. For me, what that translates to is I never just talk about nutrition because it's not the #1 priority. In fact, it's usually not even top 3, right? So I have to think about what are the other poverty factors that my students and the youth I work with are experiencing, and also talk about those things. So what have other people done about this? Well, first off, most people are targeting fruits and vegetables. Y'all, I think it's great. We should eat more. That's lovely. It doesn't matter if you eat all the fruits and vegetables if you also are eating like a lot of fast food because that's the only thing that's available to you. And you don't have any like fresh produce. Or in my neighborhood where I live in a predominantly Black neighborhood in Brooklyn. I pay twice the amount at my local grocery stores than when I go to work at the med school. What is that about? Right? So we can't just keep targeting a specific food group and being like, you guys, we're not seeing a nudge in obesity. Well, no, we're not, right? Like, no, it's so complicated. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be promoting eating fruits and vegetables. I'm just saying we can't talk about that exclusively and then be surprised when we don't see statistical findings that are significant, right? The other thing is that when we're talking about in low SES homes, and especially in urban spaces, we don't talk about adultified adolescents enough, right? This is when adolescents have to grow up fast. So this isn't just like, oh, I'm helping in the kitchen because it's fun. This is your job to help cook because I work third shift. I am running late or whatever the situation is, right? It's usually a poverty related factor while you have these responsibilities. So there are kids who are grocery shopping for their entire household, but guess what? No surveys ask about that. All surveys ask about is, do you help cook? Do you help grocery shop? No one asks, like, are you a primary shopper for the home? Are you a primary cooker for the home? And we know these kids exist. So these are the kids who I want to target. These are the adolescents I want to target because no one else really is in terms of thinking about it from a nutritional lens, right? So what is my approach? High level is one, I have to establish and maintain trust. That's it. Again, we're having really honest talk. When I go into places, I do not wear Cornell attire. It does not serve me well. The relationship, we heard the land grant, the acknowledgement, right? Like that's real for people, for people, like it's not just something we read, that's people's lives and generations of trauma, right? So I can't start with like, hi, I'm Dr. Leak from Cornell University. I start with, I'm Tashara from Durham. And I moved to the city, I'm really interested in this, this, and this. Like, can we talk? The next thing is that engaging partners in all phases. So many times I have colleagues and I'm not just talking about Cornell, I'm just saying like nationwide, right? Who are like, oh, well, let's bring them in after the study started to get their feedback. And then it's like, well, why didn't it work? Well, again, you're missing a major component, like this assumption that we know all, that we are the all knowers of everything is really harmful, right? And then the last thing is I make sure I have a really diverse team that represents the communities in which we work, right? Like we have a lot of women here. Again, I just acknowledge Women's History Month. We saw Roe versus Wade get overturned by a lot of men. So if we are up here cringing at this fact of like, I don't want men to have a right over our body, why is it we can't translate that to other populations? Right? This idea of like, how do you have so much to say about a group of people and you're not part of that community? And I've had people say, well, like, is it racist for you to have a really diverse team? These are things that faculty who do this type of work get asked. Your team looks different than the teams we're used to seeing as researchers. Your team doesn't look like what normal scientists look like, and questioning my integrity in hiring. But I know that this is important. So I have students who are from New York City. I'm like, I'm from Durham, not New York City. I'm from a baby city, right? New York City is the city of all cities. So I need students who understand how to navigate life. You know, again, you're on trains by the time you're in middle school, going an hour each way possibly to school. Right? And so having this team, regardless of what others might say, is really important. And I know that people in the BCTR get that, but what I want you to understand is that there are other people who don't get that. And that's a lot of what a lot of faculty are having to go up against when we're doing this type of work. So what did I do? So I got here July 1, 2017. Again, I was excited, I was nervous, but I remembered I was Veronica's child. I had ideas already about what I might want to do because of some of my work I've seen in multiple states. Again, this idea that no one's really creating programming for the adultified adolescent. We do a lot of fruit kebabs, yogurt parfaits. That's all fine and dandy, some basic knife skills. But if you're responsible for feeding a family of 4, we got to up that a notch, right? So I knew I wanted to create something for the adultified adolescent. And I was like, all right, I got to find some people. Alicia, do you remember this? We went to Albany together my first semester. So that was fall 2017. I was just going places. I was like, who's who? How does New York City work? And then New York City got so overwhelming that I made a phone call to somebody I knew from Durham who knew a principal in New York City and was like, this principal's awesome. He was featured in Time magazine. He's actually a Tar Heel. Like, go talk to this teacher. I did, and that changed everything. He knew everybody. You could tell he really cared about his students. And I was like, you, us, we are going to do this together. And he's amazing. So it started with that. It started with me finding the school and the principal. Then I knew I wanted to partner with Extension. And I had this tough decision of FNEP versus 4-H. And I ended up partnering with 4-H, to a lot of people's surprise, because I have such a nutrition focus. People are like, this makes sense for FNEP. But the reason I did it was because for me, the youth development part was the central part, right? The nutrition is a side effect, right? But I'm actually care about you as a whole person. And I love the strong model of youth development with 4-H. Also, it was strategic in that I knew 4-H was trying to figure out how do they diversify programming for adolescents in urban spaces and those who are not white, right? So I was like, this is really mutually beneficial. The timing is really great. So I started meeting with Jamila, some others, Andy, I know we met with. Fall was busy, okay? Then I knew that the Hatch-Smith-Lever grant was due like that December. And I was like, y'all, we have nothing to lose. Like, let's just do it, right? So we submitted it and we got the daggone money for 3 years. And the whole goal of that grant was to build out the partnerships, to actually do some work to develop this curriculum in partnership with the schools, with the students, with the advisory committee. So I do want to highlight the advisory committee because I think this is another step that's really important, that's often missing from research. I simply don't know it all. And so we need people around us to help with the various aspects that we just don't understand. So from an academic side, I had Tony was part of this. Chris Loss is an amazing food scientist, and he's the director of undergraduate studies in food science, but he's from the Bronx, right? And he's a classically trained chef, because I knew whatever I did, if there was a cooking component, we weren't making no salad, okay? I like salad, but we just weren't gonna do it. All right, so from the academic side, I made sure it was these, diverse voices. Then from 4-H, there was representation at the state level up here on campus and also in New York City. The other thing I added and thought about was an actual teacher, right? Like, I'm a professor, but my research is adolescent, but I don't know what that's like to be in school every day with a teenager, right? So I added the principal and a teacher. And then also I have a great friend who has a PhD in food science, who is also a yoga instructor and does mindfulness. She's just, everybody has that friend, right? Where they had like 3 careers and they're excellent in all of them. So that is Dr. Juanita Lewis, who just opened a new testing kitchen in Ghana a couple of months ago. Anybody who's going to Ghana, let me know. I can connect you to her and you can visit her test kitchen. So it was all about the relationships that first semester. I don't know if I might have finished up a paper, but I was like, if I don't make these partnerships, nothing's going to happen. So then 2018 happened and I kept going, right? Like, we're waiting to hear back about the next phase of Hatch-Smith-Lever. I just kept showing up at the school. So this is me playing basketball with the kids. I got pulled on the court. But this was like one of the many times I just was showing up. Also, I will take y'all on the court. Okay, I played in middle school. Don't try me. But yeah, so like, I just showed up. Like, they would have PTA meetings and I was there, because my thing is I couldn't be a stranger, right? Like, no stranger danger. So I showed up at PTA meetings. They had career fairs. I showed up. The teachers were like, hey, we're going to go get, happy hour afterwards. I was like, oh, can I come? Yep. I knew the security guard. I was just getting let in. Again, this was just really important because and I will talk about this later, one of the biggest issues with researchers oftentimes is we want the community to do something for us, but we don't want to be in community with the community. I don't have to try so hard to engage in community if I am of community. Why do we talk about community as if it's separate, as if we're not in it? But places like the Cornells, right, we often separate ourselves, right? We're the knowledge creators or what have you. We're sitting on the hill overlooking Ithaca. We create physical distance between ourselves, right? And I was like, no, this just can't happen this way. So again, I showed up and I had a great time. Like, this is me at work, y'all. I got to check this day, right? Like, this is amazing. This is really fun work. So then in 2018, we got the grant. And that was really important. And so I was like, okay, I want to do some formative research. Of course, that's not how I talk about it to the school. What I said was, I want to listen, right? Like, I have ideas. The advisory committee has ideas about this thing we think would be awesome, but we want to know what you all think. And so we got some seed funding from PCCW and from, now it's called CCSS, to conduct surveys with the students and interview principals and the teachers and a subset of the kids about just like, what did you think about this program? There's going to be nutrition components of this, like what should this actually look like? And then we also started testing recipes because, again, I knew I wanted to have a cooking component. So this is all in 2018. I'm not going to show all the findings, but I do want to make a point. So one thing I did is that I did not use the generic census tract race definitions, right? Which as a researcher is hard, right? Because what happened is you see the distribution here, and no, this is the wrong slide, sorry. But the kids essentially, most of them pick more than one race, right? And if you just moved here, some of the categories we create, people don't identify as that, right? Like, people are like, I'm Dominican, but I never said I was Black before, but I think now here in this country, I'm Black, right? So we had this very long list of how they identified. And then we also asked what cuisines they were interested in preparing. Because I was like, well, do they want to make things from their own cultures? But this is New York City, so you're exposed to a lot of different things. So we did this survey. These were the different types of cuisines they were interested in. And we used this to determine which cuisines we want to make. And then again, I'm not going to read all of this, but I just wanted to highlight around the food. There were some interesting things about the food. And this one quote, which it reads, when I asked, like, what type of cuisine would you like to prepare? One of the students said, I was thinking Caribbean. I've never tried Caribbean food. My grandmother's Caribbean, so she never makes food for me because she thinks I'm going to make fun of her. So I want to be more aware of how to make it. That way it doesn't seem like I'm trying to bash her. This is survival, what's being described. This is, to survive in this country, I have to assimilate and abandon my cultural food norms. So I'm not going to teach them to the next generation because I want you to be able to adapt in this place. And this student is saying, but I want to learn. And by participating in this program and learning how to make this, I can better connect with my grandmother. I was not expecting this response, but it was so powerful to see the students see themselves in the cuisines and think about, again, how can they communicate with their families, and also highlighting the shame that my field often supports, right? Because we just got to have the Mediterranean diet. I'm from there and I like the food, but like, like that can't be it. That can't be the standard, right? So the most important thing about this is that we actually listen, right? Like, we didn't just collect the data and let it sit on the shelf. We use this to, again, pick the recipes and determine like what we're going to make and how we're going to make it. So there was a lot of work happening. We partnered with an amazing high school. So for ACE, we were targeting middle school students, but we partnered with a great high school who could serve as peer mentors. Those peer mentors, that high school, Food and Finance High School, is in New York City. It's like the premier culinary high school in the state. These folks, I've gone to 2 of their galas. Questlove from Jimmy Kimmel? Jimmy Fallon, he DJs for the high school gala. He's on their board, right? This high school is amazing. They have partnerships with Food Network and all of that jazz. So we had them test out the recipes because it's like, okay, these students are going to be near peers. Can you actually do this if you made this at home? The other thing we did this year is I paid for them to come up to Ithaca. So while they got these 3 high school students got an internship to help with developing this. They got to come up to Ithaca. They attended some programming on Ithaca. And let's think about how powerful that is. So that's something else I always think about. It's not just the study participants, everybody who touches this. Are you better for being a part of this? Like, I'm always asking my colleagues, is there anything I could do to support you? What do you need? How can we use this to whatever it is, right? So all of this is happening in 2018. We are out here. 2019, the advisory committee, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna pay for you all to go down to the field, to New York City. I want you to meet with the principals. You met the high school interns. Let's go to their school, and the school catered a dinner for us. So on the left, this is a picture of us at one of the middle schools. Who is this? Old. Oh, okay. This is Daryl McDaniel. He's from Run DMC. Surprise at the school, right? Like, we just show up and the principal's like, hey, it's a strange day, FYI, like Daryl McDaniel's here from Run DMC. And I'm like, what? So we're fanning out, okay? This is us trying to be cool, especially Ben. Poor Ben was like really trying to be cool because he was like, this is his guy. But I was like, it was just an amazing day. And then we ended with dinner at Food and Finance High School. And again, they were students who catered the meal for us. So we got to sew into the school. We gave them money school. They hosted us. And then we got to talk with the high school students like, hey, just how are you? How's life? This is, again, a lot of work, right? And my tenure clock is like ticking at this point. This 2019. And then we all know what happened in 2020. Then I was like, I don't know, like, I'm going to get fired. Are we all going to get fired? I don't know how this is going to go. So this, of course, was devastating. It was devastating because at this point, we started making contact with some of these schools since 2017. In 2020, we're actually supposed to roll out the program. Everything shuts down, but we were like, we care about you. And I think this is, again, the part that sometimes gets lost in the research. I'm working with people that I care about. And so forget the study right now, right? Like, we're in a state of emergency. So what did we do during this time? We started calling students to make sure that they had access to meals, because so many students were part of like getting free breakfast and free lunch. So we were like, hey, there's pickup sites near your house. Do you want to go? Can we help support you getting there? So we made calls, and then we still also had virtual, I don't know what's going on. I'm scared. The system would automatically shut down. What do you want to do? Cancel, shut down. Oh, that was scary. Okay. And one of the schools was like, a couple of schools were like, hey, we're going to do like virtual college and career readiness fairs. And so we hosted it. And so some of my undergrads who are here, they got friends at other universities, and they did virtual career panel, right? Where the students in the middle schools and high schools got to say, what was it like to go to college? How did you pick the colleges? But I just wanted to say that, like, we just didn't stop and start working on secondary data analysis, right? We did that too. But we really were like, let's maintain these relationships. Like, we care about you. We want to make sure, we're here. So finally in 2021, it was safe-ish enough to start a version of ACE, which is the Advanced Cooking Education Program. And of course, we did end up adapting it for Zoom. We met the students though, we recruited in person. We still showed up in the classrooms just so they knew who we were and things like that. But the ACE they do 2 activities a week. So one day is a wellness and professional development day. We did this on Zoom. So let's say this happens on, let's say, Monday. And then we also send them home with groceries each week to do a cooking lab at home on their own. So on Mondays, actually, we would go to the school to give them the groceries. So we didn't use like Instacart or anything like that. We actually physically gave them the groceries. Even though it was like a quick contact, I think it mattered for them to see us even for that 30 minutes, right? That quick exchange was like, hey, how are you doing? How was your day? Things like that. They would log on, let's say on Zoom on Tuesdays for 2 hours. And we did mindfulness, professional development, nutrition lessons, and then reflection. So the biggest thing I want to highlight here is the professional development piece, because that took up the majority of the lesson. So this goes back to, I'm a nutrition scientist, but I care about youth development, right? And so when we talk to parents, like, what would motivate you to have your kids participate in this? Their number one concern was education. They were like, I want my kids to go to college. I want them to be prepared to apply to college. And so it was all about professional development. So what we did was expose them to different careers in food and nutrition. And we also did some of the 4-H classic activities. So they engaged in National Youth Science Day, which has like a coding kit. They did, and then they also did public presentations. And for that, it was like a mock job interview at the end of the program. So they picked a job and they had to say like, why are you qualified for said job? So the kids love this part of the program, like, because maybe you would want to eat healthier if you see yourself in the field and you want to role model healthy eating, instead of me saying eat more carrots, right? And saying it over and over again. Even the nutrition lessons, we tied the nutrition lessons to the cooking labs. So it wasn't just like whole grains are healthy, they have fiber. No, it was like, okay, whole grains are great. This is why, and this is how you're going to use whole grains to make rasta pasta. We're using whole wheat penne, right? So the nutrition lessons didn't stand alone. They were connected to the cooking labs. And then they would go home and cook with their families, some of them with their siblings or by themselves, and they would send us pictures. So that's what the actual program looked like. Again, we chose Title I schools. So that's schools that get Title I funding from the federal government. You get this money if at least 60% of your students are from low income homes. And it's supplemental money, like the schools can use it how they want to. But for us, it was a proxy of income status because I didn't want to ask each student, right? Because once you start asking those questions and given what our goal was, I felt like people would have not had their kids participate. So it was very intentional that we did not get income data at the individual level. This isn't as important. I won't go through this, but I just wanted you to know, though, at the beginning of the program, at the end, we did stay after school a couple of days and we did nonetheless collect some data. This is a feasibility study, so we didn't expect to see like significant findings, but it allowed us to like test out different, measurements. I was especially worried about the skin carotenoid levels. It's a machine where you put your finger on it, and I was worried that people were going to think like it's a fingerprint, especially if students are not documented. So we had to talk through a lot of that, but actually like they loved it. They found it very fascinating and they were like, I want to bring my sister to do it. But it talks about the importance of us communicating though, right? I didn't just set out a machine and say, here, put your finger here, right? Like we actually talked about what we were doing and why we were doing it. I'm not going to go through this, the stats, but one thing I will point out here is that, where is it? Retention. So if you go to this third row, we had very, very high retention. Like it's unheard of. And the reason I put this slide up here is because I want you to know it works, right? When you put in this type of energy to build relationships and maintain them, it works. And the kids want to show up. Who is reporting that they have 100% retention, 96% retention? And most studies, it's like 70, 75%, maybe 80 if you're lucky. So that's the biggest thing I wanted to point out on this slide. We did also, again, I constantly want to check in. We did focus groups at the end and we asked what they thought about the program. I'm not going to read this quote, but high level, they just were like really enthusiastic. They talked about skills they learned. They talked about it was really fun to do this with their family. They talked about how the mindfulness piece, like I was surprised about the mindfulness part. I didn't know if they were going to be like too cool for school. And I'm like, let's meditate. But no, they were like, after a long day at school, it was nice to have quiet time. There was also a journal prompt that they did. They also did affirmations. So as you can imagine, teenagers in the beginning, if we all had to do an affirmation, you would be like, I am smart, right? It's hard at first to like speak life into yourself. But by the end, they were like, I am smart. I am brave. And I was like, yes, you are, right? And so those affirmations were a really, really important part of the mindfulness component. And so even though the feasibility study ended in last spring 2022, we don't disappear. So we show up for graduation, right? Think Hannah's in here. We're at graduation with flowers and cards saying like, we're so proud of you. We're taking pictures with them and their families because again, we are part of their community. We don't have to do all this extra stuff because we're already there. So what are some of the big lessons that I've learned from all of this? Again, be in community with community, prioritize the needs and desires of the community. Oftentimes we come in with these pre-made solutions and we got to be flexible, be transparent and communicate, especially around timeline. The academy is slow, grants are slow. So what you didn't know is I used a lot of startup money to do things. I also had set aside money. I was like, if I don't get this grant, I'm going to do some small scale version of this because I don't want them waiting 3 years before we do anything. The other thing is also, again, that plan for sustaining partnerships. I've been thinking a lot about the partnership piece. I think sometimes we have to think depth versus breadth. And for me, I just want to have more depth. And so what does that actually look like? And that takes me to ARC. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on ARC, but I want you to see the connection of how ARC supports engaging communities, not just in nutrition research, but in anti-poverty equity research. So this quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world," was, I feel like Neil Lewis and I, when we came up with ARC, were nearing the end of being assistant professors, and we were just hungry, and we're like, there's still something missing here, right? There are people doing this work, but as a faculty member, first off, again, BCTR is the hub. It's like the safe space. I feel like we find a little hole and we're like crying on Juan's shoulder, and like everyone's hugging us, and we get meals, and everyone gets it, right? But then we got to go back into our units. Some people get it, some people just like really don't. And so how do you navigate that space? And so we also were like, how do we gather faculty who might be like one or two of you doing community work in your department? How do we gather you to create space for you to be in community with one another? And so that is where really what drove the development of ARC. So it launched last January, and it meant to serve a couple of purposes. So again, one, how do we gather faculty who are really serious about doing equity work, not studying differences by Black and white, but going into the communities on the ground, doing equity work in partnership? How do we create community for them? And the other thing I want to acknowledge is, one, how do we get people to work better and more efficiently between Ithaca and New York City? The med school and tech campus are down there, but there's not that much infrastructure, like where do you stay, office space, things like that. And then lastly, and also most importantly, is we don't want to work in these silos. I care about changing systems. I can't do that simply in the academy, but the academics are over here, the government people are over here, the community organizations are over here. And so we wanted to figure out, how do we get all these people together so we can leverage our strengths and our resources to solve problems that we all really care about. And so when I had made the statement a couple of slides ago about sustainability and wanting depth versus breadth, one of the things we really thought about is, sometimes I don't want to make up a study either to have a reason to be in partnership with an organization. But what does it mean? What if we just had like one organization we collectively partnered with, or multiple people partnered with, in like each borough of New York City? And so that is one of our biggest things. It's like an organization that does lots of different things. So I'll highlight the Boys and Girls Club of Harlem, for example. I started working with them on a food justice project, but that Boys and Girls Club, of course, is not just the kids. The parents have connections. They host other things for the parents, like employment training. They talk about housing. So that's what human ecology stands for, right? So you could think about people with multiple disciplines from various disciplines can do work there, right? So that way, if my grant runs out or my project runs out, it might be that Adam is like, well, he's doing something there too. So when they see us, it's like Cornell ARC is here, and there's lots of people that we engage with, right? Because we are embedded, we are part of this community. We are not outsiders. You see us on a weekly basis. So that was really important, was to have like partner organizations in most of the boroughs. The other thing we built out was an evaluation unit when we're still building that out. We love working with community partners, but for everybody here does this type of work, right? We know that most of them are nonprofits, collecting data, who has time for that, and who has the money for that. And so how can we support community organizations with their efforts to apply for grants, to evaluate their research? One of these partnerships I want to highlight is actually upstate, because again, ARC services the entire state. And it's the Double Up Food Bucks program across upstate. And so we're evaluating the Double Up program. This program is in, I can't remember the exact number. It's like in at least 30 counties upstate. And the whole purpose is for every SNAP dollar spent on fruits and vegetables, you get $1 in return to spend on a subsequent visit. We are in the process of submitting a new grant with them. And what's amazing about this is the reach. right? Like we're impacting thousands and thousands of people with this program. So I just wanted to highlight both. We have partnerships in New York City and also upstate. When I had mentioned this, how do we bring the people together? Our primary way is through our symposium. We had our first symposium last August. And so what does it actually look like? We had panels, and for each panel, there was a community partner organization, a policymaker, and a researcher. And then at the end, we had opportunities for people to network with one another and say, hey, I heard you talking about, proposing this bill. I have expertise. So before you propose this bill, like, why don't we talk? And also community partners saying, I would love for someone to evaluate X, Y, and Z, but we don't have the time or the expertise, right? So it was a really, really beautiful event. And again, there's an article about this in the Chronicle. As I close, and we have a couple of minutes, 10 minutes left, I want to acknowledge our partners. And normally we rush through these slides, but I actually just wanted to sit here for a minute. None of this would happen without them. I don't know, it's just interesting as a faculty member. Again, you all know I'm up for tenure right now. It's not beyond me that there's no way I would be considered for tenure without these people, right? I get access to so many resources here as a faculty member, from my salary to startup packages and seed grants on campus that are just funding students and giving us a couple thousand to fund a student. Like I have organizations in the city who are like, man, you got $3,000 to fund a student. If I had $3,000, I could like feed these kids, right? So it's not beyond me that these organizations and these people have just so much into me, and they're just really, really great humans. I especially want to shout out Extension, especially in New York City. When you're new somewhere, Extension in New York City has welcomed me with open arms from day one. Actually, before day one, before I actually signed to come to Cornell, I did a second visit and I said, I want to spend half my time in Ithaca and half my time in New York City. Because if I'm gonna do research here, what does that look like? And when I walked in the doors, it was like my shoulders dropped, right? I was like, I am with like-minded people, and they're like, we can help you. You can do this, you can do that. And it just felt so warm, and continues to be that. And we continue to partner together. So again, just so grateful for all the partners, but especially Extension. I also want to acknowledge my massive team. It's taken me 6 years to figure out how to have a team in Ithaca and have one in New York City. I'm still figuring it out and learning a lot, but I told everybody I'm a startup. Like, we are a startup. And so all of these people have trusted me to not lead us into the abyss. And oftentimes, again, just very blindly. And I don't take that for granted. I'm gonna start crying. I'm gonna keep going. All right. So again, more team members. It just takes a lot of people to do this work. And when people ask like some of the things I'm most proud of, yes, it's the work, of course. It's the work, but it's also, again, like these people. Like, I have the privilege of training people, who then come back and say, like, if it wasn't for you, this was my first research experience, or now I'm able to do X, Y, and Z. And you're also seeing a lot of women of color, a lot of first-gen students who I hope that I'm having an important impact in their life long-term, not just for like, whatever the semester that they were with us. The funding, I also want to acknowledge, especially USDA. We've gotten a lot of USDA funding. The funding is important to me, not from the way I think other academics think of it, especially when it comes to NIH. It feels very elite. You got to get an NIH grant. That's not how I think about money. For me, I think about money as ways to create equity. So I'm always paying partners for their time, for their space. There's probably somebody in HR from in here, but I'm also talking about pay equity for staff here and in New York City. I'm constantly saying, hey, we got to pay them more. We got to pay them more. This isn't appropriate. So I can't do that if I didn't have the funds. So for me, that's why I chase the big dollars, not because it looks good and it means that I'm an excellent scholar. It's because it's really important for me to honor all the people, and also to not just like nickel and dime. Anytime people are doing poverty work, it's like we got to have a coupon, right? And we have to cut corners, and I get it, but I was like, what would it look like if I was able to get the best for my students in these research studies? If I was able to say, no, we don't have to cut this corner, right? And so that, again, I want them to have experiences that their peers who are from higher income backgrounds and who look different from them have. And then I'm just going to leave you with this quote that I think about a lot, and it's from Mary Church Terrell. And so lifting as we climb, onward and upward we go, struggling and striving and hoping that the buds and the blossoms of our desires will burst into glorious fruition ere long. I don't know what that means, that part. With courage, born of success achieved in the past, with a keen sense of responsibility, which we shall continue to assume, we look forward to a future large with promise and hope. And so for me, as I think about this next phase in my career, one thing I know for certain is that I will lift as I climb. And with that, I thank you, and here's my lovely family.
You have time for a couple of questions, and we do have one online. And the question is, did the SNAP emergency allotments this year impact your work at all?
It's hard for me to, I'm going to say not me as a researcher and the research that I do, but of course it's impacted like the students in our programs, but my students aren't talking about SNAP, right? It's one of those things that it's probably impacting their households and their families, but the students haven't. But no, it has not impacted my research. Most of the only SNAP project I'm working with is that's very SNAP specific is with Field and Fork, the Double Up program. And they haven't been impacted either thus far.
From in person? No?
And I also want to acknowledge that there are a lot of students here. And so I hope that you feel comfortable asking questions about, again, the how to navigate these academic spaces and hold true to your values and do nonetheless like really meaningful work. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I just wanted to ask if so through the program, the kids learn how to cook all these different cuisines, and I know that for those kids, like getting those ingredients might be expensive, and so I was wondering if there's any component of your program that teaches them about budget shopping, and then teaching them like once the program is over, they're not going to have all these funds to actually buy like whole wheat pasta or all those other ingredients. So I was wondering what measures you took to ensure that they would be able to sustain their nutritional well-being after they finish your program.
Yeah, so this is again where I'm going next is really what you're talking about. So one, before we finalized the recipes with the 3 original schools, there was a resident from Weill who actually went on foot to check the local bodegas to see like, are the items available? So first it was like, can you even find these things? The other thing we did was we had substitutions for a lot of things in the recipes. And then now we are also collecting like cost data, and we'll be analyzing that over the next year. The last thing I'll mention is that I'm really intrigued by this idea of Instacart and Amazon, not as organizations, but this idea of food delivery as a way to address food insecurity, especially because in New York City, you're not going to get a new grocery store built up. And so especially when people live in shared buildings, I've already had some preliminary conversations about what would it look like to have like on the first floor, like, what is it, like coolers or whatever, like lockers where like they can drop off food. So I'm looking into that also, like what does grocery delivery look like in another one of my studies? And I'm learning a lot, like what happens if you're not home and the grocery person, like if the person like leaves it outside. That happened last week. I'm still really scarred. But so yes, definitely thinking about that, because you're right. Like, what does it mean for me to introduce you to all these things and then you don't have access to them later? Yeah.
Home run recipes that was popular and reasonably priced.
The Rasta pasta was like by far like the fan favorite. They really like the Rasta pasta. Which, do you remember any of the other ones? That I know that one for certain is like a favorite. I think there's also a Dominican dish that I think is really, really popular. And I went back and forth about, okay, well, do I only focus on, because some neighborhoods are actually quite like where I live in Brooklyn, like it's very much a Caribbean neighborhood. Now, I'm not saying everyone's from one specific island, but you know what I'm saying. And I was like, well, should I just have like a Caribbean 12-week? But when I asked the kids, they were like, no, we want to learn how to make other cuisines that we're nonetheless like exposed to. So it wasn't just the cuisines that they cuisines from like their cultures that they were interested in. Yeah.
Are there files in-
We have them in a 400-page booklet. Yeah, and I have to like talk to like legal or something about like how to share all these things, but the point is for it to be shared 100%. So we will be sharing, like we want everything to be very publicly available. Yeah, absolutely. Mhm.
I don't know if you have any advice or is there a way to work towards it, but how can we help students who are here for shorter periods of time do community engaged work? I know a lot of 2-year programs or something like that. It's people don't want to get into it because they don't want to abandon.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. You asked an amazing question. It goes back to ARC, because this is why we created ARC, because it's like, okay, you shouldn't be forming a new partnership and you're a master's student or you're a postdoc or whatever. You should be doing work with an existing partner, right? That someone else already has, so that when you go on, we still have representation there from other people. So it's not about you, right? It's that you are part of this larger community that is going into this space. So that's one, I appreciate you being thoughtful about that, because I think some people aren't. They're like, oh, I'm just going to go and do it. But two, I think that's also why maybe don't start a new partnership. Do something with somebody who's going to be around and yeah, that has some legs. Yeah. Yeah.
Thinking about where you found out, having navigated this course and sharing with us, I'm curious about two things. First, if you would advise early career people to do what you've done, and if you would, what supports might they find? If art and nature working supports is it, and then maybe that's it. What are the different areas? Would you suggest a similar path for early career path?
Yeah, so this goes back to me being Veronica's child. I am very big, I'm about to use your word on purpose. And I have never questioned what my mission is. My path, right? How I get there and what it actually like looks like, but I always knew like who I was serving. And so for me, I couldn't sleep at night if I did something different, right? And so I guess I would say is life is very short. And so you need to do the thing and the things that are really important to you. Now, with that being said, no, I'm not trying to be jobless, right? And I knew that in academic spaces, again, I'm not just calling out Cornell, like in academic spaces, faculty got to publish or perish, and you got to get the grants. So I did those things, right? I did it. But for example, I have some peers who submit like 4 grants a year. I submitted like 2 external grants and I got 2 external grants. And I think the reason I have 100% success rate is because I put all my energy into it, right? Like I looked into everything because I was like, I don't have time to pull together 10. So yes, you can do it. I just think that how you navigate the space might be different from other people in terms of like the number of grants you apply for, because you still got to build these relationships. And in terms of the community, I think that's where I feel hope. You know, again, BCTR has been really, really instrumental to me. Like I really started engaging in my 3rd year, and more I was like, this was my true institutional home, like intellectually and socially. And I realized that there are amazing people across the university. So I would say, yes, do this work, build community. There's BCTR, there's art, and then find people in other departments. Because the people are here. We're in a transition. And again, it's not just Cornell. This is like the new wave in the academy, right? Like you're hearing words like translation and engagement more and more. So this is happening. We're just going to feel some of the tension from folks who weren't trained this way. But that doesn't mean we're running. That means like we're here. It means we're here and we got to do this work because the people depend on it.
Hi, thank you very much for very powerful and inspirational lecture today. I'm not in the same field of nutrition, but I'm also a scholar, and I know I can relate to many of the things you said, similar to that gentleman's question, how do you balance the publishing responsibility and also your passion for community engagement, right? Yeah. So yeah, this was one of the most meaningful presentation I've ever attended at Cornell. So thank you very much. My
Absolutely.
question for you is, well, so knowing that you spend the first year just building relationship and so forth, so it seems like a lot of time spent
Yeah.
outside of your academy. So how did you manage to balance your publication responsibility and your community engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I had papers I was finishing up from my postdoc. I had 1 or 2 papers, but if you look at my CV, that first year was kind of light. And even the second year was kind of light in publications. Things really picked up by year 3 or 4. But again, I knew this and I was intentional. I think where we get in trouble with doing this work is being surprised. I know what the expectations are. I know who all the players are. And so I had to come very strategic with, okay, I'm not going to put a lot of energy into publishing that first year or 2. I'm going to do year 3. Like, that's what I'm really strategic. That's one of my strengths. So I was really on whiteboards and I was like, this is what it looks like. And as people were saying, all right, we're a little concerned this year 2, you only had 1 paper. I was like, in my head, I was like, it's coming. It's coming. And it worked. Right. And I think that's why I'm grateful again for this space, because we have to talk about this type of stuff. Right. That's why when I come to spaces like this, I just don't show graphs and the findings. I'm like, how do you create, if the goal is excellence, we keep saying that the university, and not just this university, everybody wants excellence. How do you get people to be excellent? They have to feel like they have intellectual community. They have to be able to talk about real things. You can't feel shy about saying, how do I manage all of this? And so I'm grateful again for BCTR for having space for us to have these honest conversations, because I know they're not everywhere, but just seek them out. And my community has grown a lot the past 2 years, and it's made me so much happier as a scholar. And I feel like I can actually do this because I don't want to leave the academy. Like, I get to engage with the most amazing students ever and the most amazing colleagues ever. It's just we're in a culture shift. So I'm gonna write it out because I'm Veronica's child.
And with that, we're gonna leave it there. Dr. Leak, thank you so much.